Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're reading from Canto 10, Chapter 14, which is Brahma's prayers to Krishna. It's a long chapter. It's a really long chapter. And it's a very important chapter. There are many verses in this chapter that are celebrated and repeated again and again because of their importance. And in the course of these prayers, many things are being accomplished, but the section that we're discussing now has to do with Sambandha Gyan. Sambandha, relationship in Hindi and in Sanskrit. So, the relationship of all things with Krishna. And this particular section has to do with the relationship between Krishna, the source of everything, and the jivas, and Krishna, the source of everything, and the illusory energy, because it's his energy. So what's his relation with the jivas and the illusory energy, and the jivas crossing over that ocean of illusory energy or illusory material existence? How does it work? And, how do the dynamics of the relationships work? So we know, because it's presented earlier, and it's throughout the Bhagavatam for that matter, bhakti is the means to cross the ocean of material existence. So the little bit of discussion we had this morning, what does Madhvacharya say about this universe? We know what Shankaracharya says. Jagat Mithya. It's false. And of course, Madhvacharya says the opposite. It's real. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says that there's simultaneous oneness and difference of all things with Krishna. So we'll hear this term, because it's in the verse, where it's not real or illusory, but it's not real or illusory in the sense that it's temporary. Temporary. Nrita. N-R with a dot under it. Nrita. Anrita. False in the sense that it's impermanent. Now you see it, now you don't. The Prakriti we discussed this morning. Prakriti is eternal. There are 5 subject matters in Bhagavad Gita. 4 of them are eternal, 1 of them is temporary. The temporary one is karma, and all the other ones are eternal. But there's different states of Prakriti. Sometimes this, sometimes that, sometimes the other thing, according to Krishna's indications. So, the energy is real, but the diluting influence that it has upon a living entity can be withdrawn or can be crossed over. So that's what's being discussed here in this verse 24. Translation 10:14-24. Those who have received the clear vision of knowledge from the sun-like spiritual master can see you in this way. What's that way? As the very soul, capital S, of all souls, the super soul of everyone's own self. We'll come across the Sanskrit being drawn out. The super soul of everyone's own self. Thus, understanding your original personality, they are able to cross over the ocean of illusory material existence. And Jiva Goswami's commentary reads, by knowing you as described, people easily become liberated from samsara. Samsara. Anybody need to know what samsara is? You know what samsara is, right? You know what samsara is? Samsara is the wheel of birth and death. You know what the wheel of birth and death is, right? After this lifetime, the soul moves on to another, whatever form of life, and it continues and continues. That's the wheel of life, or the cycle of birth and death that repeats itself, samsara. By knowing Krishna, you've become free from samsara. As the highest object of prema, so beyond just liberation comes prema. They realize vichakshate, you as described in the previous verse, which is the highest form among all jivas and even among the three purushas, like the sun in relation to its rays. They realize you as the soul of souls. These are now back to the people with knowledge. Atmat mataya, not just as a pure soul. You with me so far? He's the soul of all souls, not just he's pure, and we're not so pure, so we can become Krishna. In other words, that's not so. No, he's the soul of all souls, not just a pure soul. The Guru is compared to the sun because he gives direct instructions, unlike other instructors who are like lamps in comparison. You understand that comparison? A lamp gives light in a small space, and rays of the sun give light in a large space. So, to know about, how this camera works, or to know about something, and then you learn that something and you have a career because you know something, and you become rewarded or engaged in doing that something that you know. But Guru is not just knowing cameras or your career occupation in understanding. It's to know the soul of all souls. That's the Guru function. The Guru is compared to the sun because he gives direct instructions, unlike the other instructors who are like lamps in comparison. An example is Shukadeva, who instructs as follows. And a later verse in this chapter, 14, not just Brahma's prayers, but Shukadeva gives some kind of summary at the end. Krishnam ena avehi tvam atmanam akilatmanam, saying to Maharaj Parikshit, you should know Krishna to be the original soul of all living entities. The Upanishads refer to Gopal Tapani Upanishad. I don't know, that's funny language. Gopal Tapani Upanishad says, Yo Sao Brahma Param Brahma Gopal, or the Supreme Brahman is Krishna, Gopal. Bhava means samsara. That's back to now this verse 24. Bhava, so we now know what samsara is. It's a cycle of birth and death. And bhava is the misery that goes along with the cycle of birth and death, or having material bodies. There's bhava. Since it is false, meaning temporary, Since the creation is false or temporary, they take shelter of you because you're not temporary, you're eternal. And by that, they cross samsara easily, as if it were water in a calf's hoof print. That is indicated by the word iva. Iva means like that easily. Conclusion. Oh, Lord-aside Lord. This is a quote from the prayers to the demigods to Krishna when the prison house of Kamsa. Well, Krishna's in the womb of Devaki. The demigods come and offer prayers. O Lord-aside Lord, by concentrating on your pure form of Shuddha-sattva in meditation, some people cross the ocean of nescience as easily as one steps over the hoofprint of a calf by those lotus feet, which act as a boat obtained by the grace of devotees. And Sanatana Goswami writes in his commentary, by proper knowledge of you, by bhakti, they become liberated from samsara easily. They know positively, vichakshate, they know positively you, though the controller of all jivas, as dearer than themselves. They hold Krishna to be dearer than they hold themselves. And there's the Sanskrit that he's the controller of all jivas. Sakalatmanam svatmanam. We're going to hear that term again. Sva atmanam. The soul of all atmas. Sva atmanam. As dearer, atmataya, dearer than themselves. Or another reading could be, they know you, though the Paramatma, that is the Atma of me, or Svatmatmanam, they know you, though the Paramatma of all jivas, as dearer than the self. By bhakti to you, they cross the uncrossable ocean of samsara, which is false. Nrita. We touched on that before. Nrita is false in the sense of being temporary, not false in the sense of it doesn't exist. That's a really extended topic. If you want, we can go into it, but you have to put your philosophy seatbelt on because it's a little cumbersome. It is said to be false because it is insignificant or arises by ignorance. So that's two additional meanings. It's temporary, it's insignificant, or it arises by ignorance. That's this cosmic manifestation, or the ocean of material existence. Final paragraph by Sanatana. Because the knowledge of Atma is included in knowledge of the Lord. Right? If you know the absolute truth, you know the parts of the absolute truth, because they're part of the absolute truth. Because the knowledge of Atma is included in knowledge of the Lord, by knowledge of the Lord, one easily crosses the ocean of samsara. Because of their Atma Gyan, knowing of the self. Okay, that's it for text 24. We're going to move on. Here's the verse and the purport for text 25. 10:14:25. Here we go, rope and snake again. A person who mistakes a rope for a snake becomes fearful. But then he gives up his fear upon realizing that the so-called snake does not exist. There we go again. Does it exist? Anyway. Similarly, for those who fail to recognize you as the Supreme Soul of all souls, the expansive illusory material existence arises, but knowledge of you at once causes it to subside. Now, illusory existence, let's do two or three things. When you become a devotee, you become a pure devotee, you become situated in knowledge of Paramatma. It's not that, that furniture disappears, or the house disappears, or your body disappears, or the snow disappears, or, it's not like that. Things don't disappear. But the deluding influence of everything subsides. Things still exist, but things are seen instead of object for sense gratification. They're seen as paraphernalia to be used in service to the Lord, because they're the Lord's. So the illusory influences desire separate from the Lord. And the cure is desire connected to the Lord. And there's no such thing as being desireless. Or it's like being under anesthesia, and when you're under anesthesia, you don't know what's going on. Consciousness is very dulled and suspended temporarily. When anesthesia wears off, then you feel whatever you feel. You feel the pain of whatever the surgery was when you're under anesthesia or something. Commonly, we hear that there's three states of consciousness. There's Sanskrit terms for each of these: awake, dreaming or sleep in dreaming, and deep sleep. And deep sleep that's the susupti, like anesthesia. Or the living entity that's within the womb during the first 7 months of the mother's pregnancy. The soul is there, the soul is conscious, but its state is susupti state. Or like when living entities are in the body of Mahavishnu during cosmic annihilation for a whole night of Brahma, it's susupti state. And then there's dreaming state, and there's awake state. Now, according to Mayavadis, with some scriptural reference, there's another one, number 4. And the number 4 is none of the three. It's definition by negation. What is it? Well, you can't describe it because it's not one of the three. It's not something you can even talk about, because you can only experience it if you go beyond consciousness. It's tricky double talk. And that's what they're saying, what the state of Brahman is. Brahman realization is that fourth state, beyond consciousness. There's very easy ways of refuting, but without going into the refuting. It's simply word jugglery. And the going beyond material existence is the illusory material existence arises when the soul turns its attention away from the Supreme Soul. The illusory material existence is dispelled by turning attention to the Supreme Lord, to the Super Soul, to Krishna. Now we heard this morning, I think it was, maybe it was yesterday morning or this morning, Rupa Goswami says, if you'd like, it's interesting detail, those who become Paramatma realized, they don't yet, it's by meditation, by the mind being absorbed in Super Soul, they're not engaged in active service yet. And so they may attain Shanta Rati, or Shanta Rasa, the state of neutrality, which is what part of the commentary of what the the previous verse was saying. Those that understand the soul, they understand the super soul, and they're not the super soul. They're subordinate to the super soul. By the super soul, they can get that realization, and that realization constitutes Shantarati. A basic existence of acknowledging I have this subordinate relationship with the Supreme, that it isn't moved yet into the realm of service. By the association of a devotee, one can move from that position to dasya rasa. So back to the rope and the snake. That's the second point that we discussed in the morning class, is really simple. If you mistake a rope for a snake, that means snakes are real, and you have experience of a snake, and some based on that experience of a snake, or at least knowledge of a snake, you think the rope is a snake. So both things are real. The rope is real, the snake is real, and they have some similarities. They're a coil, or whatever the similarities are. Maybe some color or whatever it is that makes them similar. Only then can you mistake a rope for a snake, or something that... It's a philosophical topic. We discussed in the morning class this superimposition, a conception of something that lays on top of and covers the other thing. A concept of something that superimposes itself on something. This is Mayavad doctrine. It's got a nice name, Vivartavad, and it's like, I'm Mr. Red Shirt, or I'm Mr. Maroon Sweater, and you're, each one of us. The covering is not the person. Doesn't mean there isn't a covering, but the theory is all there is one thing, that's Brahman, and there's some Maya that's not Brahman that covers Brahman, and Maya is to think the covering is a jiva, an individual, but there's no individual. All there is Brahman. So you just remove the covering, this superimposition thing, this upadhi or vivarta or covering that's superimposed on the thing, and then you know what the thing is. Brahman. It's Brahman, I'm Brahman, everything is Brahman. Everything is Brahman. Everything is Brahman. And Maya just doesn't exist, it's false. It's in this fourth state of consciousness. Oh boy. It's just word juggling. So, when you no longer mistake the rope to be a snake, when you understand it's a rope, then fear goes. So it's saying, it's connected to two verses earlier. This illusory existence gives people misery, or, in this case, a particular kind of misery gives fear. But when you understand what it is, and you understand the living entity, what the living entity is, the living entity has a connection with the supreme living entity, then fear is gone. Yes? That's what the verse is saying. And here's the BBT purport. Those submerged in illusion see material existence as infinite, just as one who is submerged in water sees only water all around him. For example, material scientists and philosophers submerged deep within the ocean of material illusion, imagine that material nature extends infinitely in all directions. In fact, the material creation is a finite ocean of ignorance in which foolish living entities, such as material scientists, are unceremoniously dunked by the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, this is not Prabhupada's language. This is definitely Pre-Daidandamarja's sarcasm, I can tell. To be trapped in a world in which all things are born and die is certainly a fearful experience. Anyone trapped in a dark place naturally becomes fearful, since material life is covered by darkness of ignorance. Every conditioned soul is fearful. The material nature is not ultimate reality, and thus analysis of matter can never provide answers to ultimate questions. This dark, snake-like existence is called material life. Immediately disappears as soon as one opens his eyes to the bright light of Krishna consciousness. Sound familiar? The brilliant as the sun metaphor, this Bhagavatam, in the dark age of Kali, gives light to all conditioned souls because it's as brilliant as the sun. Or Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshuda Meditam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. My spiritual master forced me to open my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge, thus dispelling the fearful condition of darkness of ignorance, and with that fearful condition, suffering, just because it's natural. It's kind of amazing that when Brahma was first born, it said specifically in Brahma Samhita, all there was darkness in all directions. There was sound. He heard the splashing of the waves of the Garbhodak ocean. So he was very intelligent. Even before he got knowledge of the Vedas, he's very astute. He heard the waves. And then down there is where I'm sitting on a lotus flower, so that where I just follow the stem down, and I'll find out where I came from. But he couldn't find the end. He kept climbing down and down and down and down and down and down. It's not like it was endless, but it's just the conclusion was, by empiric speculation, empiric examination of things, I'm not going to understand my source. So even before he went back up the stem, when he got to that point, that's when he heard tapa. So he went back up. I understand what that means. I'm to engage in austerities, and then I'll be able to understand. And his austerity specifically was chanting of mantra. But it's darkness in all directions. How long can you sit in a dark, no light at all? No light at all. And you just chant your mantra. And he didn't even get hungry. It's nothing. 1,000 celestial years. Pretty intense tapa. A little puzzle, that I'm sure there's an answer, but a little puzzle is, below him, maybe it was really far away, but below him is Garbhodakshay Vishnu. He's self-effulgent. And on the hoods of the Anantashesh, there's jewels that are effulgent. So there was some light somewhere in the universe, maybe very far away, because he's at the top of the universe. So maybe, because it's a big universe. Somebody sent me a Museum of Natural History by using some kind of computer technology. They take you on a space journey of what is known from astronomy and Hubble telescopes and everything. What's the structure of the universe, and where's this little tiny Earth planet in the big vast universe? and it gets after really quickly. It gets lost. The Earth planet. No, what they see with their senses, what anyone sees with one's senses, or even powerful, expanded instruments of the senses, it's not as effective or not as perfect as knowing things from Krishna or knowing things through the Vedas. Here's one. Um, After this weekend, I'm going to be conducting a seminar, a 4-part seminar on Govardhan Prikrama. The first part of the Govardhan Prikrama is talking about how did Govardhan appear. Now we know how Krishna appeared, and we know how Radharani appeared. We know how the Bhagavatam appeared. How did Govardhan appear? It's a nice story how Govardhan appeared. And where he appeared was as the son of Drona Chala. Drona Chala is a mountain peak. And where that mountain peak is not on this earth planet. It's in another place. It's in Bhumandala, one of the rings of ring-shaped islands. Forget the name, Shamali, something like that, Dweep. And that's where he took his birth. And when Palasya was on pilgrimage, he didn't just go on pilgrimage on earth, he went to this other place. And when he saw Govardhan, it was wow. So he asked Drona for some charity. He said, sure. He said, I want your son. No. Anyway, so it's a place. It's there in the 5th canto, and it's there in the pastime. There's many other examples of this. So with the scientists, the cosmology folks aren't going to be able to find that place. Not just that it's known by a different name. It's in another dimension. It's not to be understood through sense perception. But it's part of the structure of the universe. And there are lots of things that the Vedas give us information about that's beyond the range of the senses to perceive. And even things that the senses can perceive, the senses get it wrong because they're imperfect instruments. So what are you going to do now? When you got to live in the world, when you have a body with senses, and we're used to relying on knowledge that's through the senses. Or the other one is inductive reasoning, and we're used to relying on inductive reasoning like anything. And that's it. That's our sources of knowledge. And into our life comes another source of knowledge. It's not those two. We may use those two. I mean, to hear the Vedic sound, you have to use your ears, and to try to understand, you use your reasoning power. But we know that our material senses and our material reasoning power isn't going to get us to that place that's beyond the senses and beyond our reasoning power. We reason and say, okay, I accept. I have faith. And so we engage in the hearing process. For that matter, the soul. Who can prove, or for that matter, who can disprove the existence of the soul? It's beyond reasoning. You can reason it exists, you can reason it doesn't exist, but you'll never know just by reasoning. A logician will come along and say this, and someone else will come along and say that. And anyway, it's the reasoning procedure is fallible and never conclusive. So what are you supposed to do? Just like cross your fingers and have faith in the Vedas. We don't just cross our fingers and have faith in the Vedas, but we try to understand. We use our faculties to try to understand and understand the limits of our senses and inductive reasoning process to understand. There's limits to understand. But through gradual purification, through the hearing process, then we can start to understand about these three topics that's in this verse. All of that roundabout thing was to go back to the verse. There's a soul, and there's the soul of all souls, and there's the diluting influence of this material nature that's around us. And it's causing perplexity, it's causing fear, it's causing pains and troubles and, physical and subtle mental disturbances. And we don't like it. We want to be enjoyers, we don't want to be sufferers. But along with the package comes suffering. So no, the option that's being presented to us by the Bhagavatam, through the Bhagavatam, is to let go, not just let go, throw away jnane prayasa udapasya, discard, reject completely the speculative approach to understand what's beyond the mind, to know, or the intelligence to know. And Shrutikatam Tanavan Manobir, we dedicate ourselves to sound vibration like this, so then we can know, better than even knowing through the mind and senses, we can know in fact, pratyaksha, avagamam dharmyam. So that is to say, it's knowledge that becomes revealed. And knowledge that becomes revealed that leaves you no longer hankering and lamenting. Wow, wouldn't that be nice? Brahmabhuta prasanatma na sochati na kangsati samak sarveshu bhuteshu. Seeing all living entities equally. Mad bhaktim bhavateva. So that approach, that's something you can understand through practical realization. That's what it means, pratyaksha avagamam dharmyam. Pratyaksha is direct perception. Like, really easy one, the example in the Bhagavatam. When you're eating, at a certain point, you can tell somebody, no thank you, I don't want anything more. I'm feeling full. You don't have to have somebody tell you, now you've eaten enough, you're feeling full, you shouldn't eat anymore. I mean, somebody could conjecture, but they don't know when you're full. But you know when you're full. So when you're full, when this realization comes, purification and realization comes, you're full. You don't need validation or a certificate from anyone. It's demonstrated by your character and your conduct. There's no longer chasing after the illusion of material happiness, finding sense objects and senses getting together and having happiness happen. It's another experience, another behavior that we can observe because of a higher consciousness that's there. So that's where the crossing the ocean of samsara. And the perhaps not observable result is the soul doesn't take birth again. In the short term, the misery subsides. In the long term, the soul doesn't take another body. Purnar janma na. That's how powerful, that's the understanding of the topic of Krishna's position, just like it's in this verse. It's really important subject matter. It's your path out of suffering and fear and material existence into the realm of spiritual existence by sound. Happy travels. Let's see if there's some discussion. $7:14. Anybody in the room? And that was a yes or no?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. So let's see if we have something online. Nobody in the room is volunteering. Anonymous.
Yes. Oh, it's from Amol.
Bakshi.
Just-
Amol Bakshi.
Just says Amol. So,
Okay.
in yesterday's class on verse 23, you mentioned how Jiva Goswami takes each Sanskrit term from Brahma's prayers and supports Brahma's conclusions based upon the Upanishads.
Well, mostly the Upanishads. There's some other references, yeah.
I was wondering why a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam needs support from Upanishads.
It doesn't. It's for the for you. Srimad Bhagavatam is the best pramana. For other people, they don't have that opinion. If they hear the Shrutis say, then they're more comfortable accepting the meaning of a particular term. But there's not disharmony. There's no need, but there's not disharmony. It's just helping a certain section of society feel, convinced or more convinced.
From Shalini Mataji. In the morning class, you mentioned that Brahmavadis do not attain Shantarasa and yogis who meditate on Paramatma with the touch of bhakti attain Shantarasa. I would appreciate if you could please explain these two statements in relation to Shukadev Goswami as Brahmavadi and four Kumaras being knowledgeable in Brahman and having Shantarasa.
Well, they were Brahmavadis, but were they Shanta Rasa personalities? They were Brahmavadis, but they were Brahman realized, but were they Shanta Bhaktas? So that you're posing that as a premise in your question, and I'm not sure the premise is correct. Okay.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Guru Maharaj is not on the topic. It is about, you mentioned this in one of the lecture, I couldn't find it. For the new person coming into Krishna conscious, right? For them, we are giving Bhagavad Gita. You are suggesting in one of the lecture, like other books also, Maharaj, for the new person who is coming into Krishna conscious. I want to hear that one more time.
I was suggesting other books.
Science of self-realization, like that you're telling, other books, like which will be good just to start with.
That's good to start with science of self-realization. A lot depends upon the person and their interest level. One of the nice things about science of self-realization is it's topical. In the index in the front, if you want this topic, there's 4 or 5 classes or transcriptions of discussions. So there's different topics, and people can go topic by topic of what they're interested, because often people are interested what they're interested in. They want to read about what they're interested in. So it helps to connect. And it's designed by the persons who put it together, the editors, to cover a range of topics in a simple manner. But some of the other small books are like that as well. Perfection of Yoga and Easier Journey to Other Planets, Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. Those are good. Okay. Looks like it's going to be a light evening. You have something?
Guru Maharaj, we discussed that the rope and the snake. So once both are real, but both are existing. So once I understand that this is not a snake, it's a rope, then the fear is gone. For that, that example is given for us to accept, Krishna and recognize the Supreme Lord. Once we recognize the Supreme Lord, the fear will be gone.
Yes. That's
So-
how it is used in this case.
In this case, so I feel like it is not just recognizing, but also like realizing. Or so recognition for me means like, okay, I have a master, and I am a servant, but I am not in a position to act completely in that relationship.
That's what Shantarati is. They're not acting, they're just recognizing. That when the service kicks in, then it's Dasya Rasa.
Yes, Guru Maharaj. And even in Dasya Rasa, there is, it's not complete still because there is fear,
No,
as we said.
Dasya Rasa,
Yeah, I'm not saying that the devotees who are purely in Dasya Rasa, but I'm saying that we are also devotees doing some service in that way.
we're not realized yet.
Not
We've
realized.
got lots of coverings and attachments and affinities for temporary, and we had a ways to go
Okay.
for pure consciousness.
Yes.
But it reduces, the bewilderment and etc., fear, etc.
And Shalini Mataji continued with her question. She said that she read in Chaitanya Charitamrita that 4 Kumaras are written as Shanta Bhaktas.
Okay. If they are Shanta Bhaktas, then her question is, how do we apply, could you go back over her question?
I would appreciate if you could please explain these two statements in relation to Shukadev Goswami as Brahmavadi and 4 Kumaras being knowledgeable in Brahman and having Shantarasa.
If they have knowledge of Brahman, does it preclude any rasa? Or is a fundamental foundation for any rasa? To understand Brahman, to understand the sat aspect of the personality of God, it's a sat aspect of reality, in contrast to the asat, the temporary. So they can have, different rasas will all have as a foundation, fundamental feature, understanding what is eternal, understanding reality from illusion. Does that address your question? She's very quick to respond.
Yeah. I'm thinking this is my understanding, Guru Maharaj. I am thinking she is asking that Shukadev Goswami is a Brahmavadi without any rasa, whereas the 4 Kumaras have been also Brahman realized, but Chaitanya Charitamrita says they were with Shanta rasa. What is the difference? So what is the difference?
What was she saying?
That's what my understanding is from the question, but I don't know. She can.
I thought she also said that Shukadev Goswami is a Shanta, is a Shanta rasa, a Shanta rati, personality. She didn't say that.
She did not say that. She said
Oh.
Shukadev Goswami as Brahmavadi and 4 Kumaras being knowledgeable in Brahman, I mean, they were also
Brahmavadis. They were Brahman realized.
realized, and having Shantarasa. So that is an additional
So
aspect.
maybe she'll find somewhere listed that Shukadev Goswami was, but I don't know why they have to be the same. And she doesn't say they have to be the same. She's saying what's the distinction. Not a distinction.
She
Maybe
says
in that, maybe in that preliminary stage, just like nectar devotion, that this reference of Shantarati comes from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami, where there's knowledge of the soul and knowledge of the Supreme Soul, but not yet active service. That's Shantarati. So, we can't say, I mean, why doesn't she do between now and the next class? See what she can find, what is said about Shukadev Goswami and Shukadev Goswami's position in relation to the absolute truth, other than he was Brahman realized.
she mentioned
Further research.
she mentioned that she will write you an email with reference and ask you the question.
Okay, but specifically to ask, find out what Shukadev Goswami's rasa is, if it's mentioned anywhere.
Next question is from Giridhar Prabhu. This is question from Sri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. His lifestyle and teachings are very inspiring. In his last teachings, he was teaching humility by preaching door to door. Any teachings for Grahasthas from him regarding humility cultivation? It's Girivardhari Prabhu.
To say that he was going door to door, I don't know where that reference comes from. He would speak with large audiences. I haven't read that he went door to door. Bhaktivinoda did, his father, but it was purposeful. At a particular juncture of time, he was stating that the place across the river on the western side of the Ganges that people were taking to be the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was not. And rather it was on the eastern side of the Ganges, just as it says in the scriptures. So then he went door to door to ask people for 1 rupee to build the temple. But by doing that, my understanding is he was risking his life, because the persons who were invested monetarily in their whole livelihood being the place of birth of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was on the western side in Navadvip town. They didn't want him doing that. He was risking his life. Bengal is, they don't go by rules. So, but I don't know. So the particular question is instructions for householders in humility. But it's not just householders in humility, it's anyone. It's a principle. And the foundation of humility is to know who you are. And to know who you are, you have to let go of the misconceptions of who you are, or the false ego conceptions of who you are. But the real humility is a spiritual conception of who you are. So by reading Bhagavad Gita and cultivating a lifestyle of devotion to Krishna, you'll have plenty of opportunity to become very humble. And I can suggest that one of the best ways to become humble is book distribution, because you're not going to get lots of smiles by approaching people and say, please take this knowledge. I mean, some people will certainly smile, but you're going to get lots of other people that will challenge you or insult you or harass you or, get out of here or something. And you smile, and you're not looking for praise, you're looking for being an instrument of Lord Chaitanya to fulfill his mercy, and you have to be connected to that in a spiritual conception. It's very good for anyone, book distribution, besides it's pleasing to our disciplic succession members. Something else? Okay. Anything? No? Okay. All right. Haribol. Prabhupada ki jai.